Imagine standing at the edge of a riverbank. The year is not counted in centuries or even millennia, but in millions of years. Before you, in the tall grass, shapes move with a gait that feels uncannily familiar. Upright, steady, surveying the horizon with eyes that weigh opportunity and danger. They are not us, yet they are closer to us than anything that had ever lived before. These are Homo erectus, the most enduring humans in history, 2 million years. It is a time span almost beyond human comprehension. To measure it is to stretch imagination to its breaking point. Our own species, Homo sapiens, has only been around for roughly 300,000 years, a mere spark compared to their vast flame. Think of it this way. If the history of Homo erectus were a long road stretching from Paris to Beijing, the history of our species would take you barely from one side of Paris to the other. They lived, thrived, and adapted across landscapes so ancient that rivers have shifted courses and mountains have worn away since they last walked the earth. Yet, this isn't just a story of longevity. It is the tale of a species that mastered the delicate balance between fragility and resilience. They survived predators larger than lions, climates harsher than deserts, and shifting continents that tested every living thing for nearly 20 times. The span of our species so far, they carried the torch of humanity. Without them, there would be no us. What makes Homo erectus remarkable is not only their endurance, but also their evolution into something recognizably human. They looked like us at a distance. You might mistake one for a rugged wanderer, shoulders square, legs long, walking with purpose. They used tools, and not just crude flakes of stone, but deliberately shaped hand axes and implements that carried knowledge from one generation to the next. They may have sat around campfires under the African stars, their faces lit with the same orange glow that still gathers us together today. They cared for their sick, they adapted to strange new lands, and they endured long enough to see the world change again and again. Consider what it means to live across 2 million years. When Homo erectus first appeared, the Earth was home to saber-toothed cats and giant hyenas. By the time the last of them disappeared from Java and Indonesia, the first Homo sapiens were already beginning to leave Africa. Our own ancestors, ready to step into history. They existed at both the dawn and the twilight of ancient humanity. In many ways, they were the bridge that carried us from a world of apes to a world of humans. This journey is not simply a parade of fossils, or a dry recounting of skull measurements. It is the story of lives lived across firelight and floodplain. Across savanna and seacoast, it is a story of the first truly global humans, stretching from Africa to Europe to Asia, who endured longer than any human species before or since. Their world was not primitive in the way we often imagine. It was alive with invention, strategy, and subtle acts of care. So as we begin, picture the span of human history not as a straight line, but as a vast, branching forest. In that forest, Homo erectus is not a footnote or a side path, or the central trunk, sturdy and unbroken, standing for almost 2 million years. Everything we are, our bodies, our tools, even our restless urge to wander bears their mark. This is not just a tale about them. It is a tale about us too, because in their footsteps, we find the echoes of what it means to be human. Homo erectus emerged nearly 2 million years ago, and for most of that time they thrived. But like every great story, theirs had an ending. The last known traces of this resilient species come from the island of Java in Indonesia, a place that became both their refuge and their grave. At Enggondong, along the banks of the Solo River, archaeologists uncovered skull caps and shin bones dating to around 117,000 to 108,000 years ago. Imagine that. While glaciers spread across Europe and Neanderthals hunted mammoths, a dwindling community of Homo erectus still walked beneath the Javanese canopy, clinging to survival. It raises an irresistible question. Could they have met us modern humans? After all, our species was already stirring in Africa and making its first hesitant steps out into Asia. Fossils from Mislia, cave in Israel tell us Homo sapiens left Africa much earlier than once thought, between 177,000 and 194,000 years ago. This discovery shifted the timeline dramatically, opening the possibility that our kind and Homo erectus may have overlapped far more than imagined. And yet, the archaeological record is stubborn. The oldest evidence of Homo sapiens in Java dates between 60,000 and 70,000 years ago, long after the last Homo erectus remains. By the time we arrived, they were gone. No tools lying side by side in the same soil layers, no overlapping hearths, no bones mingled together. As far as we can tell, the two species missed one another by tens of thousands of years. But science rarely accepts neat endings. Sometimes the most curious clues come from the most unlikely places. Consider lista tiny parasites that have shadowed humanity across every age. Genetic studies reveal that human head lice split into two distinct lineages about 1.18 million years ago. When Homo erectus was thriving and our own species didn't yet exist, one lineage traveled the world with Homo sapiens, bottlenecking around 100,000 years ago as our species spread. The other survives only in the Americas, isolated for over 1 million years. How could both end up on modern humans? One possibility is startling. A transfer of lice from Homo erectus to early Homo sapiens, a moment of direct contact, not trade. Not war, just enough physical closeness for parasites to change hosts? The thought is intimate, unsettling. Two species, separated by hundreds of thousands of years of divergence, brushing close enough that their pests made the leap. Yet without fossil evidence of shared sites, the theory remains speculative. Skeptics caution that lice may tell a different evolutionary story entirely. And without bones to back it up, the mystery lingers in the realm of possibility rather than proof. Still, it is a tantalizing reminder that sometimes history hides in the smallest of details, written not in stone, but in DNA. What we do know is that Homo erectus held on in Java long after they vanished elsewhere. Perhaps the island sheltered them from competition with newer humans like us. Perhaps its stable climate, close to the equator, buffered them from the ice ages ravaging the north. Whatever the reason, they endured there quietly, stubbornly until the forests thickened, food became scarce, and time itself closed the door. Their last stand is more than a chapter ending. It is a mirror held up to us. For while we imagine ourselves as permanent, the truth is that our species has walked the earth for only a fraction of their span. If Homo erectus could thrive for nearly 2 million years, only to fade without ceremony, what does that say about our own future? The story of Homo erectus might have remained buried forever if not for a Dutchman with an obsession. In the late 19th century, Eugene Dubois was a military doctor stationed in the Dutch East Indies, modern Indonesia. But medicine was not his passion. He was consumed by a single, almost quixotic goal: to find the missing link between apes and humans. At the time, the idea of evolution was still young, and many scientists dismissed it as speculation. But Dubois believed the key lay hidden in the tropics of Asia. His search was relentless. He left his post, enlisted convicts as diggers, and scoured the steaming banks of rivers in Java. The locals whispered about the orang pendek, mysterious small man of the forest, and their tales only deepened his determination. Then, in 1891, near the village of Trinel on the Solo River, Dubois unearthed a treasure that would change science forever: a skullcap, thick-browed and strange, not quite human, yet not ape either. Beside it lay a femur-long straight, built for walking upright. He named it Pithecanthropus erectus, the ape man who stands upright. Newspapers across Europe carried the story of the discovery. But where Dubois saw a breakthrough, others saw a mistake. His critics accused him of exaggeration, of misinterpreting ape bones, of chasing fame. For years he defended himself bitterly, storing the fossils in boxes under his bed, refusing to show them to colleagues. Vindication would come slowly. In the 1920s and 30s, new finds surfaced thousands of kilometers away at Shaokudian, near Beijing. Teams of Chinese and international scientists uncovered dozens of skulls, jaws, and bones, the famous Peking man. The fossils bore the same traits as Dubois's find: heavy brows, sloping skulls, and the unmistakable signs of upright walking. Suddenly, the lonely skullcap from Java was no anomaly. It was evidence of a widespread species that had walked not just Asia, but Africa and Europe as well. From then on, the pieces fell into place. Fossils from Kenya and Georgia, from Turkey and Spain, painted a picture of a species that spanned continents. What had once been dismissed as an oddity became the foundation of our understanding of human evolution. Today, Dubois is remembered not as a crank, but as the discoverer of the first known Homo erectus remains. His stubbornness, his willingness to endure ridicule for decades helped pull an entire species out of the shadows of prehistory. But the discovery of Homo erectus also taught us something humbling about science. Knowledge does not march forward in a neat line. It stumbles, it argues, it gets lost in pride and doubt before circling back to clarity. The fossils of Trinell and Shakudian remind us that progress often depends on those willing to endure ridicule. For the sake of evidence, imagine the moment Dubois first brushed soil from that skullcap. It's a quiet realization that he was holding a fragment of a creature that had walked the earth hundreds of thousands of years ago. In that instant, the distance between modern humanity and our deep past collapsed into something tangible. Not myth, not speculation, but bone. In the end, Dubois had not found a missing link. He had found something far richer, a new chapter in the human story. A species that would go on to reveal just how diverse, adaptive, and enduring human family could be. Asterisk, picture a face framed by heavy shadows at the edge of a campfire. It is not a face you would mistake for your neighbor's, yet it is not wholly alien either. The brow is massive, a ledge of bone casting deep shade over the eyes. The forehead slopes back, the skull long and low, its rear angled rather than rounded. The nose juts forward, more prominent than those of earlier hominins, a feature thought to help conserve moisture in dry air. The jaw is wide and thick, without the pointed chin that defines our own. This was the face of Homo erectus, a mixture of familiarity and raw, unsoftened strength. Scientists have long puzzled over those colossal brow ridges. Were they merely structural, the product of evolutionary necessity? Or did they serve as signals, bold markers of dominance and identity? Some anthropologists argued they were nature's crash helmet. Evidence from fossil skulls shows healed fractures and injuries that, in modern humans, would be life-threatening. Yet these individuals lived long enough for their bones to mend, a brow ridge that could deflect or absorb a club's blow or disperse the force of a thrown stone. This may have meant the difference between survival and extinction, but others see something more symbolic. Just as a silverback gorilla's massive crest declares power, Homo erectus's brows may have been silent billboards of strength. To confront another with such a face might have been both a warning and a test, a way of resolving disputes before they spiraled into violence. If that is true, their bones carried not just protection, but meaning, a language written in bone. The jaws tell another story, thick mandibles, broad teeth, and surprisingly thin enamel. This peculiar combination suggests a diet that was both varied and tough. Brittle nuts, fibrous roots, and meat sliced with stone tools but still demanding powerful chewing. The wear patterns on their molars reveal tiny pits and scratches, silent records of meals consumed hundreds of thousands of years ago. These mouths were not dainty. They were engines designed for survival, adapted to process whatever the land could provide. Imagine biting into raw tubers with no cooking fire, or tearing strips of sinew from the leg of a hunted animal. For Homo erectus, mealtime was an act of endurance. And yet, through that endurance, they carved out an existence across plains, forests, and coasts. Their faces, so different from ours, remind us that humanity is not one fixed form but a spectrum shaped by struggle. Over time, we shed those prominent ridges, those fortress-like jaws. Our skulls became smoother, our brows subtler, our chins more pronounced. Why? Because communication shifted from physical resilience to subtlety in our faces today. Emotions flicker fear, empathy, curiosity, things that massive ridges would have hidden. We traded armor for expressiveness, toughness for trust, and yet one cannot help but wonder at those earlier faces. how they looked when lit by dawn on the savannah, how they glistened with sweat after a hunt, how they stared back across firelight in silent calculation. Behind those brows lived minds that had begun to shape tools, share food, and carve a legacy into the bedrock of time. When we gaze at a Homo erectus skull in a museum today, it may seem remote, a relic locked behind glass. But if you imagine the life that skull once held, the fights survived, the meals consumed, the group it belonged to, you realize it was never just bone. It was a face built for impact, and it endured for 2 million years. Asterisk. On a windswept lakeshore in Kenya, more than 1.5 million years ago, a group of Homo erectus walked across wet ground. Their footprints, pressed deep into the mud at Ileret, have fossilized into time's diary. When scientists uncovered them, they discovered something astonishing. The tracks were not the awkward shuffles of ape-like ancestors, but strides that looked almost exactly like our own. Heel to toe, balanced, efficient. These were not creatures halfway between tree and ground. They were walkers of distance, movers across continents. The body of Homo erectus was tuned for travel. Their legs were long and straight, with narrow hips that aligned their gait into an energy-saving rhythm. Their feet bore arches, acting like springs to absorb impact and propel each step forward.
Owly.
Their arms, shorter than those of earlier hominins, swung naturally with locomotion, stabilizing the trunk in ways that freed energy for endurance. This was no accident of form. It was an adaptation honed by the demands of wide-ranging survival, where food and safety often lay miles away. Sexual dimorphism, the difference in size between males and females, was still visible, more pronounced than in modern humans, but less extreme than in gorillas. The fossil footprint suggests that groups may have included individuals of varying sizes walking together, hinting at complex social bonds. This matters because the spacing of the Ileret prints reveals not a solitary trek, but a coordinated journey. A band moved together across the land, leaving behind not just evidence of survival, but a story of community written in the earth. Perhaps most striking was their endurance. With their long limbs and hairless, sweating bodies, Homo erectus could do something no predator of the time could match: persistence hunting. Imagine chasing an antelope in the searing midday sun. It bolts, sprints, and escapes at first. But hours later, in the heat, the antelope begins to falter, overheating while the humans, cooling through sweat, press on. Step after step, mile after mile, until finally the exhausted prey collapses. To run not with speed, but with patience, that was the genius of Homo erectus. Their gait also carried a hidden weapon. Their shoulders, unlike the tree-climbing apes, had rotated into a configuration that allowed powerful overhand throws. A stone or a sharpened wooden spear, hurled with accuracy from a distance, could wound or kill prey far larger than themselves. This gift of the shoulder was evolutionary alchemy. From simple locomotion came the power to project force beyond arm's reach, an ability that would eventually give rise to javelins, arrows, and warfare. When you imagine these humans striding across plains or coastal paths, picture not just bodies in motion, but minds expanding with every horizon crossed. Their gait gave them reach. Their endurance gave them territory. Their shoulders gave them power. It was the first fully human stride, a stride that would one day carry our own species out of Africa, cross oceans, and eventually beyond the earth itself. For Homo erectus, every step was survival. But every step was also legacy. The way we walk today, our springing arches, our swaying arms, our endurance on long journeys, is a direct inheritance from them. In those ancient footprints lies the quiet truth that our journey as humans truly began with the first stride of Homo erectus. Asterisk. Close your eyes and imagine the heat of an African plain 1.5 million years ago. The sun blazes overhead, the air shimmers, and there is little shade except for the sparse umbrella of an acacia tree. For earlier hominins covered in thick body hair, this environment would have been punishing. But Homo erectus had changed. Their bodies told a new evolutionary story, one written in sweat, skin, and survival. They were the first of our genus to shed the fur coat. Compared to their ape-like ancestors, Homo erectus stood nearly bare-skinned, their hair reduced to thin strands that provided little insulation but allowed heat to escape. In its place came millions of sweat glands, an adaptation unique in the mammal world. Instead of panting like antelope or overheating like big cats, Homo erectus could run and keep running, dispersing heat across a hairless body through evaporating sweat. This was their hidden weapon in the savanna, endurance under the sun. But hairlessness had a cost. Without fur, the skin was exposed, vulnerable to parasites, to cold nights, and above all, to the relentless ultraviolet rays of the equatorial sun. Here another adaptation emerged: pigment. Genetic studies suggest that around 1.2 million years ago, Homo erectus carried a mutation in the MC1R gene, triggering the production of melanin, which darkened their skin. This natural sunscreen shielded them from the damaging effects of UV radiation, reducing the risk of burns and cancers while protecting folate, a crucial nutrient for reproduction. Dark skin was not merely a shield, it was survival written in every cell. And yet, as Homo erectus spread beyond Africa into Europe and Asia, sunlight grew weaker. In those northern lands, too much pigment could block the production of vitamin D, essential for strong bones and healthy growth. Fossil evidence hints at this tension. A Homo erectus individual from Turkey, living in a latitude with lower sunlight, shows signs of tuberculous meningitis, an ailment tied to vitamin D deficiency. I suggest that skin color in Homo erectus, as in modern humans, may have varied with geography, shifting lighter or darker depending on the demands of environment. Their skin was not just about protection, it reshaped possibility. Imagine groups of Homo erectus coursing across open plains in midday, hunting animals that wilted under the same sun. Imagine their bodies glistening with sweat, cooled by wind while predators retreated to shade. Hairlessness gave them range. Pigmentation gave them safety. Together, these traits allowed Homo erectus to push further into the world than any species of their kind before. There is also a more speculative dimension. Some researchers suggest that sexual selection accelerated this transformation. Perhaps smoother, hairless skin became a sign of health, of vitality, and partners unconsciously favored it. If true, then what began as adaptation to heat became intertwined with attraction, shaping not only survival, but also desire in shedding. Fur and embracing pigment, Homo erectus changed the very canvas of humanity. They were no longer creatures defined only by bone and muscle, but by skin, a living boundary between body and world, tuned to climate and sun. The echoes of that transformation are still with us. Our ability to sweat, our skin tones across latitudes, even the way we dress and shade ourselves today, all trace back to the moment when Homo erectus stepped into the savanna and let the sun write its mark upon their bodies. Asterisk. If the body of Homo erectus was built for distance, their brains were built for possibility. At the dawn of their story, around 2 million years ago, cranial capacities averaged 600 to 800 cubic centimeters larger than Homo habilis, yet still closer to apes than to us. But as the millennia passed, the numbers crept upward. By the midpoint of their long reign, brains swelled to over 1,200 cubic centimeters, approaching the size of Einstein's own. This was not a sudden leap, but a slow burn of evolution, each generation carrying the spark a little further. Yet size tells only part of the story. Brain growth is also about timing. One of the most poignant fossils we have is the Mojo Kerato, child from Java who died about 1.8 million years ago, barely a year old. CT scans reveal that, by that age, their brain had already reached 70 to 80% of adult volume. Compare this with modern human children, whose brains are only about half their adult size at the same age. In Homo erectus, childhood was shorter, faster, more compressed. What does this mean? A child of our species lingers in dependence, with a long period of learning, play and vulnerability. Our extended childhood gave us time for culture, language, and memory to take root. For Homo erectus, the pace was different. Their young matured quickly, reaching physical independence earlier. With less room for prolonged teaching or experimentation, it suggests their minds, though advanced, were still closer to great apes in developmental rhythm. Life demanded it. On open plains filled with predators, childhood could not afford to linger. And yet, within these constraints, their brains offered profound new abilities. They planned. Aculean, hand axes, symmetrical, deliberate, and standardized, acquired. Foresight, they remembered. Seasonal movements to water holes or migration routes imply stored knowledge passed from one generation to the next. They imagined, if only in practical ways, how to corner an animal, how to choose the right stone, how to keep fire alive. Their social lives likely revolved around this growing cognitive landscape. Faster maturing children may have learned by watching and imitating rather than by extended instruction. Groups would have been shaped by immediate necessity, elders carrying hard-earned wisdom of landscapes, hunters coordinating with gestures and calls, mothers balancing child rearing with the relentless work of foraging. If language, as we know, it did not yet exist, then their communication must have been a rich blend of tone, gesture, and mimicry, a kind of embodied teaching. Where knowledge lived not in words but in hands and movements, still, there are hints of something more. The sheer uniformity of their tools across continents, Saculean hand axes appearing in Africa, Europe, and Asia suggests a cultural glue stronger than chance. Knowledge was not just individual but shared, reinforced, replicated. Seeds of tradition, of learning beyond instinct, were already germing. It is easy to imagine Homo erectus as less than us. Their minds a dim candle compared to our flame. But perhaps the better metaphor is dawn. Their brains were the horizon where night ended and day began, not yet the full blaze of modern humanity, but enough light to see, to plan, to endure. And in their children, who grew faster, lived harder, and learned differently, we glimpse both the cost and the power of their rhythm. They may not have had our kind of childhood, but they carved out a 2 million-year life for their species. In the end, what matters more, the depth of their thought or the sheer success it brought them? Asterisk when we tell the story of evolution. We often imagine a ladder, one rung after another, each species a step closer to us. But the fossil record refuses this tidy picture. Instead, it resembles a tangled tree, its branches growing, splitting, and sometimes intertwining again. And at the center of this complexity stands Homo erectus. Most researchers agree that Homo erectus emerged from an earlier ancestor, perhaps Homo habilis around 2 million years ago. Yet the relationship is anything but simple. Fossils show that habilis and erectus coexisted in East Africa for nearly 500,000 years. If erectus truly descended from habilis, why didn't the older species disappear right away? Did only a single isolated group of habilis evolve into something new, while others lingered unchanged? Or was the ancestor not habilis at all, but another primitive Homo we have yet to discover? The mystery deepens when we look at geography. For decades, the dominant theory placed the origin of Homo erectus firmly in Africa, the so-called cradle of humanity. From there, they were thought to have spread outward, reaching Asia and Europe, but discoveries have challenged this neat migration tale. Fossils in Dmanisi, Georgia, dating to 1.8 million years ago, show remarkably early dispersal into Eurasia. Even more controversially, a set of tools and skeletal fragments in northern China may point to hominins outside Africa, almost 2 million years ago. Did Homo erectus evolve in Africa and spread with astonishing speed? Or did an earlier migration of Homo perhaps, even habilis? It's self-seed populations in Asia that later developed into erectus independently. Science has not reached a consensus. Some scholars split hairs, literally. They label the African form Homo ergaster and reserve the name Homo erectus for the Asian fossils. Ergaster is described as taller, with thinner cranial bones and subtler brow ridges. Erectus proper, meanwhile, is depicted as heavier, more robust, its skull thicker and sturdier. But others argue that such distinctions are artificial. All modern humans show striking variation across regions, yet we are all one species. Why should Homo erectus not enjoy the same flexibility? What is clear is that Erectus did not rise in isolation. They shared their landscapes with an array of other humans. In East Africa, Paranthropus boisea, cousin with massive jaws and molars, still grazed on tough vegetation. In some places, Homo erectus and Homo habilis lived side by side, leaving their fossils scattered in the same layers of soil. Far to the east, at the twilight of their existence, Erectus may have overlapped with Homo floresiensis in Indonesia and even the elusive Denisovans in Asia. Imagine this ancient world, not a single straight line leading to us, but a crowded savanna of cousins and competitors. Different hominins, each with its own strategy for survival, all testing the boundaries of what it meant to be human. Some specialized and vanished. Others adapted and endured. But it was Homo erectus who outlasted nearly all, spreading further, and living longer than any of them. The branching tree reminds us of a sobering truth. Evolution is not progress. It is persistence. Homo erectus was not an imperfect draft waiting to be replaced by us. They were a successful solution to the challenges of their time, a branch that held strong for 2 million years. The tree had swayed differently. Perhaps it would be their descendants, not ours, telling the story today. On the open plains of Africa, a group of Homo erectus waits beneath the blazing sun. They are lean, sweat running in rivulets down bare skin, their breath steady. Ahead, a herd of antelope shifts uneasily. One animal breaks, sprinting in a burst of dust and muscle. The chase begins not in a frantic sprint, but in a patient, relentless pursuit. Hour after hour, the hunters follow, walking, jogging, never letting the prey rest. When the antelope finally collapses from heat and exhaustion, stone tools flash, and survival is won. This was persistence hunting, a strategy no other predator could match. The diet of Homo erectus was astonishingly broad. Fossil evidence and wear patterns on their teeth reveal meals of brittle nuts, fibrous roots, and fruits gathered from the land. But they were not limited to plants. With their tools and teamwork, they took down animals ranging from deer and wild boar, 2 elephants, and even giant baboons. Cut marks on fossilized bones clean, deliberate slices show that they butchered carcasses with skill, removing flesh and cracking bones to reach the rich marrow inside. But meat was only part of the story. Archaeological sites in China reveal caches of hackberry seeds, suggesting they collected and consumed fruits in large quantities. Elsewhere, evidence points to birds, tortoises, rodents, and fish as part of their menu. Insects and reptiles, locusts, lizards, scorpions would have been readily available sources of protein. For children too young to join hunts, these smaller foods provided a way to contribute, mirroring practices seen among modern hunter-gatherers like the San of the Kalahari. Their adaptability as eaters made them true opportunists. This flexibility allowed them to survive in forests, grasslands, river valleys, and coasts. To be Homo erectus was to be able to eat almost anything, an ability that gave them resilience against drought, famine, and shifting climates. In this way, they foreshadowed us, the ultimate generalists. Yet while they were hunters, they were also prey. Fossil sites in China tell grim stories. Homo erectus bones cracked and punctured by the jaws of giant hyenas. Scattered across cave floors where carnivores dragged them, nearly 2/3 of one collection bore the unmistakable marks of predator teeth. In some cases, skulls were crushed, bones gnawed, remained strewn wide across the earth. To live as Homo erectus was to live in constant tension, hunter by day, but never safe from the teeth that stalked in the night. This dual existence shaped more than their diet. It shaped their psychology. Moving in groups offered protection, and the evidence of cooperative hunting suggests not just coordination but trust. They may have communicated danger with urgent gestures or calls, huddled together when the fire dimmed and relied on vigilance at the cave mouth. Life was not solitary, it was shared, for safety as much as for food. Imagine the rhythm of a day. Dawn foraging for roots and fruits. Midday hunts stretching into exhaustion, evening meals divided. Among the group, always the awareness of eyes glinting in the dark lions, leopards, hyenas. Survival required not just strength, but cooperation. A recognition that endurance came not from individuals alone, but from the band. Homo erectus lived by this balance, predator and prey, gatherer and hunter, opportunist and innovator. Their diet tells us not only what they ate, but how they lived with adaptability, cooperation, and constant negotiation with the dangerous world around them. Asterisk, the first tools of Homo erectus were simple river cobbles, struck against each other to form sharp edges. Yet in those edges lay the spark of something revolutionary, foresight. To split a stone in just the right way required imagining the shape hidden inside. This ability to plan ahead to see not just what was, but what could be, was one of the defining traits of Homo erectus. At Olduvai Gorge, in Tanzania, archaeologists found heaps of these early tools, cores with flakes struck off in deliberate sequences. Over time, this crude technology evolved into something far more sophisticated, the Achillean hand axe. Teardrop-shaped, finely flaked on both sides, it was a marvel of design. These hand axes were not random. They were standardized, symmetrical, repeated across Africa, Europe, and Asia for over 1 million years. Wherever Homo erectus went, the hand axe followed, as much a part of them as their bones. What did these tools mean? On one level, they were practical, perfect for butchering animals, chopping wood, digging tubers, but they also reveal minds capable of abstraction. To create symmetry is to imagine balance. To refine a tool beyond the strictly necessary is to value form as well as function. Some anthropologists suggest the Achillean hand axe was the first human calling card, a display of skill and competence that may even have played a role in attracting mates. Beyond stone, Homo erectus showed ingenuity with other materials. In sites like Sanjarine and Trinel in Indonesia, shells bear traces of careful modification, transformed into cutting tools. Spherical stones found in Africa and China may have served as bolus-thrown weapons to entangle prey. These artifacts hint at experimentation, at minds willing to adapt not just to landscape but to opportunity. Shelters tell another story of innovation. At Terra Amata in France, archaeologists discovered post holes and hearths that suggest oval huts, some nearly 15 meters long. At Bilzingsalben in Germany, circular structures built from stone and bone, perhaps with elephant tusks as central posts, reveal an ability to create protected spaces. These were not random lean-tos, they were organized dwellings, places where fire burned, where groups gathered, where life unfolded. To shape a tool is to shape time. A hand axe meant food could be prepared more efficiently, would cut faster, hunts more successful. A shelter meant warmth, protection, and permanence, however fleeting. Each invention multiplied survival chances, but also freed moments for something. Beyond survival rest, interaction, even imagination. Think of a Homo erectus napper at work, a figure crouched on the ground, striking a stone with rhythm and precision. Chips scatter, sparks flash, a sharp edge emerges. Round them, others watch, learning through imitation. Knowledge is transferred, not through words, but through hands and eyes. In that act lies culture, the passing on of ideas across generations. For more than 1 million years, the Achillean hand axe hardly changed. Some see this as stagnation, a lack of innovation, but perhaps it was perfection. A tool so efficient that it needed no improvement. And in its endurance, it became the longest-lasting technology in human history, outliving empires, nations, even species. In the sharp edge of stone, Homo erectus carved more than meat or wood. They carved a new way of being creatures who shaped their world rather than simply endured it. Fire. To us, it is ordinary, flicked into life with a match or sparked at the press of a button. But to Homo erectus, Fire was revolution. It was warmth in cold nights, safety from prowling predators, light in the darkness, and, most transformative of all, cooked food. The first signs of fire are elusive. Flames rarely fossilize. Charcoal washes away, ash scatters, yet hints emerge. At sites like Kubifora in Kenya and Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, fragments of burnt bone and reddened soil suggest that Homo erectus may have harnessed fire as early as 1.5 million years ago. Still, scholars debate, was this fire controlled, or simply borrowed from lightning strikes and wild brush fires? For many thousands of years, it seems likely they did not kindle flame themselves, but carefully nurtured embers, carrying them, feeding them, coaxing them to survive. By 700,000 years ago, the evidence grows clearer. At Gesher Banat Yaakov, in Israel, archaeologists found clusters of burned flint and plant remains spread across multiple layers of settlement. These were not random wildfires. They were hearths, tended deliberately, rekindled generation after generation. Here, in these circles of heat and light, Homo erectus became the first true firekeepers. The impact cannot be overstated. Fire transformed their diet. Raw meat, tough and sinewy, became tender and digestible. Roots and tubers, once toxic, softened into nourishment. Cooking unlocked calories, releasing energy that fueled bigger brains and longer lives. Anthropologist Richard Wrangham has argued that without fire, the leap in Homo erectus brain size might never have been possible. In every mouthful of roasted meat, their future was being fed. But fire was more than food. Picture a band of Homo erectus huddled around the glow. Beyond the edge of the light, lions' eyes gleam and hyenas prowl, but they do not cross the circle. For the first time, humans held dominion over the night. In that safety, new things became possible. Storytelling, teaching, planning. Around the fire, gestures and vocalizations could carry further, seen and heard by all. The sparks may have kindled not just warmth, but the beginnings of language and culture. Night fire also extended time itself. Day no longer ended with sunset. Under starlight and flame, Homo erectus had hours for tasks, for social bonding, perhaps even for ritual. The firelight illuminated faces, allowing emotions to be read more clearly, bonds to be strengthened. It gave shape to community, carving out a space where survival was no longer just about enduring the elements, but about living together. And yet fire held danger too. A neglected flame could die, leaving a group vulnerable. Spreading blaze could consume shelters and grasslands. Mastery of fire required discipline, vigilance, and knowledge, collective responsibility. In this sense, the hearth was not just technology, but a teacher. It demanded cooperation. It taught patience. It bound groups together in shared dependence. Night fire was more than an invention. It was a revolution of the human spirit. For Homo erectus, flame turned darkness into opportunity, raw flesh into nourishment, and fragile groups into something resembling society. In every ember they carried, they were carrying the seed of everything that would follow our myth, science, civilization, asterisk. If stone tools and fire gave Homo erectus the means to survive, it was their hints of creativity and compassion that reveal them as something more than survivors. On a fossilized shell from Java, a zigzag pattern has been etched, deliberate, precise, almost playful. Dated to around 430,000 years ago, it may be the earliest known engraving in human history. Was it idle scratching, a symbol, an experiment, an expression, whatever its purpose? It shows that Homo erectus could shape not just tools, but ideas. They also seem drawn to color. At sites in Africa and Europe, lumps of a cored yellow-brown bear, marks of shaping and heating. Perhaps they were used to decorate objects, or even bodies. If so, these pigments were the first whispers of aesthetics, of ritual, of meaning. Beyond necessity, imagine a hand dipped in red ochre, pressed onto a stone walnut for survival, but for memory or for beauty. The seas, too, tell a startling story. On the islands of Flores and Timor, across the dangerous waters of the Lombok Strait, tools appear long before modern humans arrived. To reach those islands, Homo erectus must have crossed open ocean, building rafts or boats of wood and fiber. The currents there are fierce even today. That they made the passage suggests remarkable coordination, planning, and perhaps even a rudimentary form of language. They were not confined by shorelines. They were explorers. Yet even in their toughness, we see tenderness. Fossils from Georgia show an elderly Homo erectus who had lost all but one tooth, surviving years beyond the point where they could chew hard foods. This survival is almost impossible without help. Others must have chewed food for them, or provided soft sustenance. Another skeleton, that of a young boy from Turkana, reveals a spinal condition that would have caused pain and restricted movement, yet he lived into adolescence. These are not the outcomes of a species indifferent to weakness. They speak of care of bonds strong enough to carry the vulnerable, and still every story ends. Around 117,000 years ago, the last Homo erectus vanished from Java. Why? Climate was shifting. Open woodlands gave way to dense rainforest, where their tools and strategies no longer worked. At the same time, newer humans, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and eventually us were spreading, armed with sharper tools and more flexible cultures. Erectus had endured for 2 million years, but even resilience has limits, some scientists argue. Their extinction was not sudden, but gradual, a slow dwindling as habitats shrank and populations fragmented. Others see something almost tragic, a species too conservative, too unwilling to innovate. In Indonesia, they used whatever stone was nearest, even if poor in quality, when better rock lay only a little farther away. Was it laziness or simply a philosophy of sufficiency, an instinct to take only what was close at hand? Perhaps what doomed them was not weakness, but a stubborn consistency that had once been their strength. Yet, extinction may not be the right word. In some sense, Homo erectus lives on. Genetic studies hint at echoes of ancient hominins in our DNA that do not match Neanderthals or Denisovans. It is possible that in places and times we have not yet uncovered, Homo erectus interbred with others, leaving fragments of themselves in us. Their true legacy, though, lies in the blueprint of being human. They were the first to stride like us, sweat like us, throw like us. They were the first to shape tools that carried culture, to tame fire, that reshaped diet and society, to perhaps etch symbols and care for the frail. They showed that survival was not only about strength, but about imagination and cooperation. 2 million years is a span almost impossible to grasp. They endured through ice ages and droughts, through predators and rivals. When we measure our own history against theirs, we are only beginners. Their story is a reminder that humanity is not defined by how briefly we blaze, but by how long we endure. And if we listen closely, the echoes of their footsteps, their fires, and their quiet acts of care still walk beside us. Asterisk.